Hello, everybody. What's going on? That's not what you're supposed to wear. You're supposed to wear the stupid hat and the oversized sweater. And you're supposed to start the video saying, "Hello, I'm Multi Prometheus One" and all that crap, ripping off the Nostalgia Critic. Yes. As you read in the title, this is an out of character video. This is an out of character review. And what I mean by that is, Multi Prometheus 1 is a character. It didn't start off that way. Originally, when I first started doing the Multi Prometheus 1 videos, it was basically just me being me, but using a different name so I wouldn't have to use my real name. And over time, it kind of developed into a character. That way I could do things that were, separate from, me. And, I could do things that didn't really represent me with the character, but I still thought would be funny or interesting. So this is an out of character video. This is something I'm doing not as the character of Multi Prometheus 1, but as me, the real person. You're probably going to notice that me, the real person, is very similar to Multi Prometheus 1 in my mannerisms and the way I talk and everything. And that's because, again, it started out as, Multi Prometheus 1 started out as me using a fake name, and it only evolved into a character over time. So, why am I doing this as an out of character video instead of doing it as Multi Prometheus 1? The reason for that is right now I am working on a very big Multi Prometheus 1 video. It's probably going to be about an hour long, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of editing, more complex editing than I usually do. A lot of sound design. Some visual effects. I'm doing visual effects kind of for the first time using After Effects and stuff. So, I mean, it's a big video. It's probably going to be about an hour long. So, yes, we are talking a feature-length documentary, pretty much. I'm working on that now. I'm almost halfway through the post-production process on it. Not quite halfway, but almost halfway. And I wanted to... The fact that this video is taking so long to do because it is such a big video, I didn't want it to stop me from making videos. Well, why can't you just make other videos and then release that one when you finish it? Release other videos that are quicker to make while you're working on that other one. Because there's kind of... When that video finally comes out, you'll see why. There's kind of a little bit of a storyline. And, doing other videos before that one comes out kind of messes up and creates plot holes. And it kind of screws... It's not like a big, grand Christopher Nolan-esque storyline or anything. Nothing TV show worthy, but it still is kind of a little bit of a storyline that I'm doing with this big video, and doing these videos before that one comes out would kind of screw that up and possibly create some plot holes or some things that contradict what happens in that video. So I just decided to do this out of character. And I think I've also decided to pretty much all videos from now on that are just, first of all videos that are reviews of movies I just saw in theaters, new movies that I just saw in theaters, like I did the Jigsaw review, I did the Age of Ultron review a few years ago. Those videos from now on I think are going to be out of character videos and not Multi Prometheus 1 videos. And then... So with Multi Prometheus 1, I can stick to, more scripted, structured stuff, like the In Defense Ofs and the We Swear We're Not Disney's. And also, other things that I just want to talk about, maybe out of character or maybe Multi Prometheus 1 videos, but they're probably going to be more out of character. Just doing out of character reviews like this allows me to do more things than I can do with the Multi Prometheus 1 character and format. And you probably already have noticed that this video looks and sounds quite different than my videos usually do. That's because I'm filming with a different camera. I have 3 cameras. I have my GoPro, my handheld camcorder, and my DSLR. I film the Multi Prometheus 1 videos with my DSLR because it's my best camera. But I'm going to film these out of character videos with my handheld camcorder, just as a way of, again, setting them apart and differentiating them. This is not the Multi Prometheus 1 character. This is a different thing. This is me as a real person. So that I'm filming with a different camera, which of course has a different microphone, and that's why these out of character videos are going to look and sound different than the Multi-Prometheus one videos. So there's my disclaimer. There's my explanation of what's going on out of the way. And the thing I'm going to talk about today is I finally, recently, just saw for the first time the Lord of the Rings trilogy. There are a lot of people who would say, "Really, you're a lover of film and you haven't seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy yet?" I even had close friends of mine who, like, I was the film expert in the group, and whenever any of them had something to do with film, they always came to me about it. Like, I was that guy in the group. Even they were shocked that I hadn't seen them yet. It was one of those, like, with a lot of people, it's, "What, you've never seen Star Wars?" Or, "What, you've never seen this? You've never seen..." For me, it was, "What, you've never seen Lord of the Rings?" Um, and that was only partly true because I had seen Fellowship. I had seen the first film. Um, but it was only the normal theatrical cut, and it was a while ago. It was like multiple years ago. I think like 2 or 3 years ago was when I saw it. So I hadn't really seen the films for real as the director intended it in the extended cuts and everything. I hadn't really seen that. Um, but finally, in the last few weeks, I have finally watched all three Lord of the Rings movies. And I did watch the extended cuts, which are about 4 hours each. The extended cut of the third one is like 4 hours, 23 minutes. They are long, but they're great. Um, so basically, this is just a video of me talking about it because my family really isn't into this type of stuff, and so I just kind of want to vent about it, and I don't really have anyone to talk to, and my friends are more like the artsy film type of people. I mean, I can appreciate art. I appreciate artsy films, and if you show me an artsy film, I'm probably going to enjoy it. But I'm really the only one in like my group of film school friends that like truly appreciates like Hollywood films. Like most of the people at my film school think all Hollywood movies are trash, which a lot of them are, but I don't think all of them are. And the Lord of the Rings trilogy, technically, they're not Hollywood films. Technically, I mean, yeah, a Hollywood studio distributed them, but they were entirely produced in New Zealand. Uh, the casting, the filming, the directing, the writing, the post production, everything was done. Everything was done in New Zealand. So, I mean, yeah, they're distributed by Hollywood, but I don't know if they technically qualify as Hollywood movies. Um, before I get into my thoughts on the Lord of the Rings films, I am going to add another disclaimer. I have not read the book. I have not read the Lord of the Rings novel. I have not read The Hobbit. I have not read any of the Middle-earth books that Tolkien wrote. I do plan on it, though. I am going to New Zealand this summer. That's one of the reasons why I finally sat down to watch these movies. One of the reasons is because I am going to New Zealand, and I'm really excited because while we're there, we're going to go to a lot of the locations. We're going to go to the Edoras location. We're going to go to the Hobbiton location. We're going to a lot of them, and it's going to be really cool. But while I'm in New Zealand, I'm going to try and find a copy of The Hobbit and a copy of The Lord of the Rings so I can read those books. I know the books weren't written in New Zealand, but the movies were filmed and made there, so there's kind of a connection. Plus, I'm reading a book right now, and, I don't want to stop that just to start Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is a really long book, and I really want to devote time to it. I don't want to just, like, splice it in with other things I'm reading. Anyway, that's my disclaimer. Now we can start talking about the movies. We're going to start off with the first one, and friendly reminder, again, I did watch the extended cuts. So I'm going to talk about each film individually, and then I'm going to talk about extended cuts versus theatrical cuts. All right. The first movie in the franchise, based off of the first volume of the book, is titled Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. And this movie starts out with our two main characters, Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee. They are hobbits, which are tiny little human-like creatures that are only about 4 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet tall. And and they live kind of calm, peaceful lives. They don't really like to get involved in things whenever there's a war going on or some big political thing going on. They don't really get involved. They don't really, they just kind of lay back and act all chill. You know, they're just like, whatever, I'm gonna smoke and lay around all day. They don't really do anything. That is until Frodo's uncle, Bilbo Baggins, it is just, he leaves Hobbiton, which is something hobbits almost never do, and he leaves Frodo behind this ring. Well, a wizard that is a friend of the hobbits named Gandalf, he comes to visit, and he sees that this ring Bilbo has left Frodo is actually not just a ring. It is the legendary One Ring of Power. Apparently, according thousands of years before this, 9 rings were created to help kind of control power in this fantasy world. And there was this evil wizard named Sauron, and he created one ring that was more powerful than all the others, that he could kind of focus all his power on, so that basically as long as this ring existed, he could never fully be killed. Even if his body was destroyed, his essence and his life force would still continue in this ring. And this ring, he made it so that it could only be destroyed in his lair where he made it, so that it was kind of like a failsafe, his insurance policy against it ever being destroyed. So Gandalf realizes, holy crap, you have Sauron's ring. That can only mean one thing. That can only mean that Sauron is coming back. And Gandalf looks more into things and goes out and tries to find answers about what's going on, and it turns out, yes, Sauron is kind of coming back. His powers are growing, and the fact that this ring has been found is only making his powers grow faster, and he is amassing a huge army and creating a huge army to continue what he started thousands of years ago, which was to conquer the entirety of Middle-earth, this fantasy world, and to enslave everyone and destroy what they call the world of men, basically meaning wiping out mankind. Gandalf, Frodo, and Sam, they all go to the land of the elves. The elves were one of the original caretakers of the rings, and they meet up with some dwarves, some other men, and basically they decide, okay, this ring needs to be destroyed, because we can't, if the sooner we can destroy this ring, the sooner we can kill Sauron and get rid of him forever, before he destroys Middle-earth. So we need to destroy this ring, and it can only be destroyed in the volcano called Mount Doom, where it was created, which means they have to go to Mount Doom to destroy it there. But Mount Doom is heavily guarded by Sauron's army, so they gotta go in a very small group so that they can sneak in there. And it's a very long journey. Frodo and Sam volunteer, of course. Gandalf volunteers. A dwarf named Gimli volunteers. An elf named Legolas volunteers. 2 men, Aragorn and Boromir, volunteer. And together, I think I got everyone. And 2 more hobbits that secretly came with Sam and Frodo volunteer too. And there are 9 of them. And the Council of the Elves that they're meeting with designates them the Fellowship of the Ring, and they are going to go on this big journey to the volcano of Mount Doom, sneak into Sauron's fortress, and destroy the ring so that they can defeat him. That is the main plot of the movie. I'm probably not going to dive into a lot of detail of the plots of the other 2 movies, because pretty much all 3 movies are one story. All 3 movies together are this quest, this journey to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. It starts in Fellowship of the Ring, it continues in the 2nd movie, and it ends in the 3rd movie. Not one of the 3 movies can stand alone. They're all one big story. So I think this is this first one is the only one where I'm gonna go, into a detailed description of the plot, because I don't want to give anything away. And yeah, The Fellowship of the Ring is a really, really, really good movie. I'm gonna go over the superficial, obvious stuff first. And the superficial, obvious stuff is the visual effects, the cinematography, the costumes, the set design, all of this physical stuff, this physical, superficial stuff is amazing. It's some of the best cinematography I've ever seen. It's some of the best visual and special effects I've ever seen. It's some of the best music. The music is phenomenal. It's once you get past all that superficial stuff, everything else is fantastic. Um, the acting is very good. I feel like all of these characters were perfectly cast. The writing is exceptional. I haven't read The Lord of the Rings, but I've read part of Fellowship, but I haven't read the whole. I haven't read all of Fellowship. Um, it's a very dense book, and it's a very hard book to adapt into film. So the fact that the writing is so good, the fact that they were able to include so much from the book, but still make it entertaining to watch and still make it, be paced properly and everything is very impressive. The writing is fantastic. The directing is extremely good. Peter Jackson is the director of these movies. Before this, he really mainly did low budget, gory horror exploitation films. And he just decided one day, nope, I want to do Lord of the Rings now. And he actually does a very good job. It kind of feels like the movie he was born to make. It kind of these Lord of the Rings movies kind of feel like the movies he was born to make. The editing is superb. Like the editing is absolutely superb. It's a 3.5 hour movie if you're watching the extended cut, but it flows very nicely to the point where it's never boring. The editing is very, very good. Um, just everything about the film is phenomenal. The only thing that you might be disappointed about, and I was kind of disappointed when I first saw it, when I first saw the theatrical cut a few years ago, it doesn't really have an ending. It just kind of stops. And of course that makes sense because, all these three movies were based on one book, and therefore these three movies are one big story, so you're not really going to be able to wrap anything up in this first movie, which is basically just the first third of the story. But yes, because of that, there is no ending. The movie just kind of stops. There's sort of an ending, but not really. And that was a little disappointing to me when I first saw the theatrical cut a few years ago. But now that I've seen the extended cut and I've kind of looked at things from a wider point of view, it makes sense, and I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. It just feels like the first part of an adventure, the first part of a story. Stylistically, this is the most lighthearted of the three movies. The other two are much darker and more serious because this one kind of has that optimism. This one kind of has that, we're going on an adventure. This one has that kind of vibe to it, where there's still hope. Like, we're just going to go to Mount Doom and destroy this ring, It is the most lighthearted of the three, but that's one of its strengths. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, is a very, very, very good movie. Then we move on to the second film in the trilogy, the middle portion of this story, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. First of all, before I go into the plot, I read a funny story online that I just think is ridiculous, but it's also funny. Apparently there was a lot of controversy when this movie came out because it was called The Two Towers, and it came out about a year after 9/11, and it was called The Two Towers. Yeah. Personally, though, and apparently there was a lot of controversy about it, but personally, though, I don't think that controversy was warranted. I mean, yes, what happened at 9/11 was horrible, and, all those lives were lost, it was terrible, but when Tolkien wrote the book 50 years ago, he was right. He called it The Two Towers because that had something to do with the story. It's not his fault 9/11 happened. Yes, 9/11 was horrible, but it's not Tolkien's fault. I mean, he didn't know anything about it 50 years ago when he wrote the book and called it The Two Towers. So I personally think that the controversy regarding the movie being called The Two Towers when it first came out, I don't think that was really warranted. Anyway, my thoughts on the movie itself. This is probably my least favorite of the trilogy. It's still very good. It is still very good, and I do definitely enjoy it. I did definitely enjoy it. The only movie that I had seen in this trilogy prior to this viewing of the trilogy was the first one in the theatrical cut, but I had not seen the second one or the third one at all. So I saw the extended cut. I saw The Two Towers for the first time with the extended cut, and it was very good. Uh, but it's my least favorite in the trilogy, and the reason why is quite simply it's the middle portion of the story. Um, and because of that, it's kind of the most uneventful. Yeah, stuff does happen, and what does happen is important to the overall story. There's not really a lot of filler. There's not really any filler in the movie, but also it is kind of uneventful. Um, that and because it's the middle portion of the story, it doesn't have a beginning or an end. At the beginning of the movie, it just kind of starts, assuming you know exactly what happened in the last movie, and at the end, it just kind of stops. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. And the editor, both the director Peter Jackson and the editor of the movie, both said this was an extremely difficult film to edit because it had no beginning or end. It just kind of starts and just kind of stops. And they had to edit it in a way to where it still felt like it had a beginning and an end, even though it really didn't. But that being said, despite the fact that it is my least favorite film in the trilogy, it is still very good. It continues the story started in the first one very well. It doesn't feel like a second movie. It feels like a continuation of the first one. And that's very impressive. Of course, all three of these movies were filmed in one big filming period. They were not filmed individually. And I think that was the perfect decision. I think that was a great decision because each movie doesn't feel like a separate movie. It feels like a continuation of the one that came before it. And this second one, The Two Towers, does not feel like a second movie. It feels like a continuation of the first movie. It just feels like, oh, we're still watching the first movie, just with a little bit of a darker tone because as the story progresses, things are getting a little worse for our characters. And yes, this film is a bit darker. This film is actually significantly darker, but that's to be expected. I mean, it's common in storytelling for the middle portion of the story to be quite dark because that's when the characters are at their low points. That's very common in storytelling. Um, there is a certain event that happens at the end of this film or towards the end of this film that is a lot of people's favorite part of the entire trilogy. I'm not going to go into what it is yet. I'm not going to go into what it is here because I don't want to ruin anything for anyone. It's a lot of people's favorite scene in the entire trilogy. What happens at the end of The Two Towers, and it did not have the impact on me it had on all those people. I mean, I still really enjoyed it. It was still very well done and very good, but I feel like it's a little overrated. Maybe if I watch the movie again, I'll think differently. But after seeing it for the first time, it was a good scene. It was a really good scene, but I don't think it's the absolute high point of the trilogy like so many people think it is, or so many people feel it is. Um, and when you watch The Two Towers and you come to that scene, you'll know exactly what I'm talking. Oh, this is the scene he was talking about. Like you'll know that was the scene I was talking about. Um, that being said, there's not much to say about The Two Towers. It's the middle portion of the story. It's my least favorite, but it's still very good. Just be prepared. If there was any movie in the entire trilogy that you definitely should not watch by itself, it should be this one. It's the middle portion of the story, and therefore it has no beginning or end. It just kind of starts and just kind of stops. And that makes sense given the context of the trilogy, but it's going to make it really confusing and difficult to watch for someone who hasn't seen the first movie. So please watch the first movie, please. And that leads us to the third movie in the trilogy, which is The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This is the third and final film in the trilogy. This is the film that wraps up the storyline and concludes everything. And oh my gosh, not only is this my favorite film in the trilogy, this is one of the best fantasy films I've ever seen in my life. This is quite possibly it's the second best fantasy film I've ever seen in my life, I think. I think the first best is Star Wars. Star Wars is usually called science fiction. It's not, it's fantasy. I think Star Wars is the best fantasy film I've ever seen in my life. The Star Wars films are, and I think Lord of the Rings Return of the King is definitely, it's a possible second. I mean, this movie is an absolute masterpiece. It is, oh my gosh. When people describe the Lord of the Rings trilogy, a word they use a lot is epic. But that word just kind of makes it sound like, oh, it's epic because it's got cool battle scenes and it's got fighting and action and cool special effects. No. Yes, this third one does have a lot of big battles and a lot of action scenes and a lot of special effects and stuff and a lot of visual effects, but that's not what makes it a masterpiece. What makes it a masterpiece is that Peter Jackson and the editor and the writer and the actors, they know exactly what they are doing in this. Everything in this film is done to perfection. It is the closest thing to a perfect movie I have seen in a long time. It is just so freaking good. Every single time something happens in this movie, you feel the weight. It's not glossed over. It's not, kind of skimmed over like a lot of movies do it nowadays. They don't push aside the dramatic moments to make way for another action scene. Every time something happens in this movie, whether peaceful or action-packed, you feel the weight. And it is just a masterpiece. And the rest of the film industry apparently agrees. Not only was this the highest grossing Lord of the Rings film, according to my knowledge, but also this is the only Lord of the Rings film that not only was a huge financial success, but swept the Academy Awards. That's right, a fantasy film swept the Academy Awards. Not only winning 11 Academy Awards, tying it with Titanic and Ben-Hur for most Academy Awards ever won by a single movie, but it won Best Picture. A fantasy film. The type of film the Academy usually ignores as if it's not even a real movie at all. A fantasy film won Best Picture.
And the Oscar goes to... It's a clean sweep. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Barry M. Osborne, Peter Jackson, and Tran Walsh producers.
This is the 11th Academy Award win tonight for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, tying the record for most wins with the films Titanic and Ben-Hur.
Oh, this is just unbelievable, and I'm so honored, touched, and relieved that the Academy and the members of the Academy that have supported us have seen past the trolls and the wizards and the hobbits and are recognizing fantasy this year. Fantasy is an F word that hopefully the 5-second delay won't do anything with.
This is the movie that not only got the Academy, who usually ignores fantasy films, to start looking at fantasy films and taking them seriously, it caused them to give it the Best Picture award. That tells you how good this movie is, that even the Academy couldn't ignore it. I would say, if there's any one movie you can watch in the trilogy, it should be this one. But you will not appreciate this movie the way you should if you haven't seen the other two first, because this movie is the finale to the storyline that was set up in the first two movies, and none of these movies stand on their own. They are all part of a trilogy. They're all part of one big story. So, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, one of the absolute best fantasy films I've ever seen in my life. Very close to perfect. Not entirely perfect, because no film ever is, but very close to perfect. It's a masterpiece, it really is. Now let's talk about theatrical cuts versus extended cuts. I watched the extended cuts of all these movies, and the only film in the trilogy of which I have seen the normal theatrical cut is Fellowship, is the first one. However, I did do research into what was added for the extended cuts so that I could get a good idea of what the theatrical cuts would be like. And even though I haven't seen the theatrical cuts for the second and third movie, I can say, watch the extended. Yes, they're much longer. Yes, they're about 4 to 4.5 hours each, but it's worth it. I mean, when reading about the stuff that was added for the extended cut, I find myself thinking, that was added for the extended cut? It's so important to the story. I mean, if the movie didn't have that, it would be so lacking and wouldn't even be nearly as great. It's so important. Like, a lot of stuff that's really important to the story was not in the theatrical cut, but was added for the extended cut. So, if you want the complete story, watch the extended cut. Peter Jackson claims that he doesn't really see the extended cut as better. He just kind of sees it as a different way of looking at it. But I have a feeling this is how he intended it. Being the Lord of the Rings fan that he is, and there's no way he was purely satisfied with all the stuff that was taken out the first time being taken out the first time, you know. And I bet he was really glad to see it get put back in for the extended cut. And a lot of times with the extended cut, there is a temptation a lot of times with extended cuts of movies, there's a temptation to add stuff just to add stuff, and it really throws off the pacing of the movie. But not this. The pacing of these movies with the extended cuts, even though there's like anywhere from a half an hour to a whole 50 minutes of footage being added for each movie, it's still paced extremely well. They not only added a lot of material that furthers the story even more, but they incorporated it very well to the point where they don't mess up the pacing. It is very difficult to make an extended cut of a movie and not mess up the pacing. Because a lot of the times, the reason that footage was taken out in the first place was because it messed with the pacing. So I'm just really impressed with what they did with the extended cuts and how well they did them. Overall, that is my review of the Lord of the Rings motion picture trilogy. Quick random thoughts that I never got to in my main discussion, but I'm just gonna mention now. I think Legolas is overrated. He is so many people's favorite character. Yes, he's cool. Yes, he can fight well, but he's not really that well developed. I mean, Legolas is really overrated. What else? Galadriel, overrated too. Never really got the whole "whoa, it's Galadriel" feeling that a lot of other people seem to get. Kind of disappointed that Gimli was kind of turned more into comic relief in the third film, and not really the serious character he was in the first two, or just the first one. But I think it kind of makes sense. I mean, we kind of need those lighter moments because the second and third movie are such serious movies they're kind of bleak because with so much doom and gloom going on that it kind of makes sense it kind of makes sense to give the film some lighter moments, and I thought Gimli was a good way of doing that. John Rhys Davies is a really funny actor, and he makes Gimli really funny, so I don't mind that he was used for comic relief, especially when those lighter moments do help with the very bleak tone of the movie. The very uh-oh, we're screwed tone of the movie, you know. Yeah. I think that's it. Do I have any other thoughts? Oh, one more controversy I'm going to address. The infamous green tint on Fellowship. Okay, so with the first movie, when the extended cut of the first movie was released on Blu-ray, a green tint was added to a few scenes, and a blue tint was added to one scene. This was only done for the first movie, and it was only for a few scenes that they added either a green tint or a blue tint. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers other people, but at the same time, I have no idea why they did it. It's not a mistake. I mean, as someone who, does color grading, as part of my film school education, it looks like it was deliberate. So, I don't know why they did it, but it doesn't bother me as much as it bothers other people, but I can see why it bothers other people. I mean, why? It's Middle-earth, not the Matrix. That being said, thank you for watching my first out-of-character video. I am still working on that big video. It's going to be about an hour long. It's going to be huge. Thank you for watching. Bye.